Hey guys, it's Yuta. So, should you learn Japanese pitch accent? I will give you a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is it depends on your goal, motivation, and your SPL level. And here's my long answer. But first, what is pitch accent? I will give you an example. Hashi means chopsticks. Hashi means bridge. What makes these words different is pitch accent. They basically have different melodies. I will do it slowly. Hashi. Chopsticks. Hashi. Bridge. So, hashi has a high-low pattern, and hashi has a low-high pattern. English doesn't really have pitch accent. It has stress accent instead, but you sometimes use different pitches for different meanings. For example, if I say great, it sounds like I think something is great. But if I say great, it sounds like I'm asking a question maybe. Is it really that great? And the difference is the pitch. So even in English, you sometimes use different pitches to express different meanings. There's also this expression, uh-huh, as in yes. And remember the melody of this expression, uh-huh. If I say, uh-huh, it sounds weird, right? It doesn't even sound like, uh-huh. Again, the difference is pitch. And if you can tell the difference, you already have what it takes to understand pitch accent. That's it. It's actually just melodies. If it feels difficult, it's probably because you haven't been paying attention to this aspect when you hear Japanese. But what happens if you use the wrong pitch accent? Well, in real life situations, we can probably more or less understand you from the context. We might not understand every single word, but maybe we understand enough to understand the gist of what you're saying. We don't have to understand everything, we just have to understand what we need to understand. In English, your pronunciation doesn't have to be good to be understood. If I say, please subscribe to my email list and learn Japanese with me, you understood me, right? Even though I mispronounced many sounds. And if I'm talking to you, you probably won't bother correcting me or saying, oh, your pronunciation is horrible. Instead, you will subscribe to my email group because if you do, I will teach you the kind of Japanese the real-life Japanese people today actually speak, which can be different from the kind of Japanese that textbooks and apps teach you. So click the link in the description and subscribe. So even if you don't have the correct pitch accent, most of the time we will probably understand you. And if we don't, you can always explain. Because of this, many people who learn Japanese kind of ignore pitch accent because they can get away with it. It's also because many Japanese teachers simply don't teach pitch accent. So, do you have to learn the correct pitch accent? Well, the question is, how do you want to sound? If you just want to sound okay to communicate with Japanese people, it can be a valid choice to kind of ignore pitch accent. But if you want to sound at least close to native speakers, sure, learning pitch accent is necessary, and that can also be a valid choice. If I'm okay with this accent, there's nothing wrong with it. I'd rather have this accent than this accent, but that's just my personal choice. Having said that, I think you should be informed about pitch accents so that you can make an informed decision. For some reason, when it comes to teaching Japanese, a lot of people have this over-parenting approach. They shield you from real-life language and try to dictate how you speak. I've heard that some teachers will be reprimanded if they try to teach something that is not in the textbook. A lot of people who go to a Japanese school feels like they are treated like kids. I'm not a huge fan of that kind of approach. I prefer informing you guys so that you can make an educated decision. But even if you're not gonna spend a lot of time learning pitch accent, I think you should spend at least a little bit of time learning the basics because you can get a great deal out of it. The thing about pitch accent is a lot of people simply don't know pitch makes a difference. So they overlook this aspect when they hear Japanese. But once you know that pitch matters, you can start processing this information and it's gonna make a huge difference over a long time. If you are serious about Japanese, you're gonna spend a lot of time learning Japanese, so it makes total sense to spend at least a small portion of it for pitch accent. The return on investment is huge, and you don't have to be perfect to benefit from knowing about pitch accent. I noticed a lot of people have an all or nothing attitude. Oh, if I'm not gonna be perfect, I wouldn't bother learning pitch accent. But languages don't work like that. Even if you're like 60% or 70% accurate, that makes a huge difference compared to when you are like 10% accurate. It's not useless to spend a little bit of time learning pitch accent, at least the basics, even if you're not gonna be perfect. I also noticed that many people simply misunderstand what it means to learn pitch accent. They think they have to be able to intellectually analyze pitch accent if you want to learn it. But that's not the case. Analyzing helps, especially for non-native speakers, but remember, analyzing pitch accent isn't easy for Japanese people either. For example, let me introduce you to this special word, hentai, which actually just means pervert in Japanese and doesn't mean the thing you watch on a daily basis. So I can say hentai has a low, high, high, high pitch pattern. If you have studied music, it's probably easy to tell that the second note is higher than the first note. But many people who don't have a musical background have trouble telling which note is higher. Now, let me try a different approach. Repeat after me, paying attention to the melody. So easy. Now try and sing hentai with the same melody. Hentai. A lot of people find this approach easier. So, whether you try to name each note or you try a more intuitive approach, doesn't really matter as long as you are able to hear and replicate pitch accent. The goal is here, and it doesn't really matter how you reach that goal. Of course, it's not always easy for non-native speakers to just pick up this kind of concept, so it often makes sense to have a more analytical approach. But this applies to any language. There are many concepts of English that are hard for Japanese speakers to just pick up, so we have to learn these concepts consciously. Now let's talk about some claims that people make about pitch accent, because people do make some outlandish claims. I've even come across somebody who says pitch accent is not important while admitting that they don't really understand what pitch accent is in Japanese. Well, if you don't really understand something, how do you know it's not important? Amazing. And some people say, oh, Japanese people don't talk about pitch accent. Yes, we do. I can literally just show you. Do you know Kizuna Ai, who is a very popular VTuber? But Kizuna is not a common name, so many Japanese people pronounce it incorrectly with the wrong pitch accent. So she made this video.
名前言ってもらえるだけで嬉しいな。知っててくれるだけで皆さん絆愛って。いや、私絆愛だから。ぶっちゃけイントネーション全然違うんですけど。おかしいでしょ。私ほぼ全部の動画で「はいどうもバーチャル YouTuber 絆愛です」って言ってるよね。おかしくないおかしくないおかしくないでます絆さんって。いや、嘘つきー。あ、この人嘘ついてるって思ってるから。
So she's basically saying that people who use the wrong pitch pattern probably don't care about her and don't watch her videos. You can also observe that she uses the word intonation to talk about pitch accent. We also have a more technical term, kote accent, which literally means pitch accent. But average people probably just say accent or hatsuon, which means pronunciation, because pitch accent is just part of pronunciation. We also say namatteru when we notice that somebody has a different pitch pattern. It means something like you have an accent. So there you go, there's many ways of referring to pitch accent. The interesting thing is, some non-native speakers who claim that Japanese people don't talk about pitch accent have lived in Japan for many years. This is a good example that if you are not aware of pitch accent, it's very easy to just overlook that information. It's like your brain doesn't even process the information, so awareness is important. Some people say something like, oh, it's kind of pointless to learn the standard pitch accent because there's so many different dialects that have different pitch patterns. This might sound true, but it's not a good argument because in today's Japan, no matter where they are from, there's a very good chance that they can speak the standard Japanese or at least standard-ish Japanese. I'll explain. I've heard some Japanese people say similar things because they're not aware of the fact that they actually can speak the standard Japanese or at least standard-ish Japanese in addition to their dialect. They're simply not aware of it because they don't analyze how real-life Japanese people speak Japanese like I do because I'm totally not weird. What's standard Japanese? Not every language has a well-defined standard version. For example, nobody can say, oh, this is the only standard English because there's so many countries where people speak English as their first language. But Japanese is different. We have a very clear idea of what the standard Japanese or Hyojingo is. Standard Japanese is based on the Tokyo dialect. I said based on because they're not exactly the same. In the Tokyo area, we also use non-standard expressions like jam. Standard pitch accent is part of standard Japanese, and we have dictionaries of standard pitch accent. If you want to be a voice actor or a TV presenter, you need to perfect your standard Japanese. So they often use these dictionaries. When you watch anime, you hear standard pitch accent unless the character speaks a specific dialect. We have voice actors from different regions, but you really can't tell where they are from just by watching anime because they all speak standard Japanese. And in real life, the situation where we use the most standard version of Japanese is when we speak politely. Japanese has different levels of politeness, and when we speak casually, we mostly use our dialect. It's just Tokyo dialects are really close to standard Japanese because standard Japanese is based on a variation of that. But even with people who live outside Tokyo, when they speak politely, there's a very good chance that they use at least a type of standard Japanese. They might just add some local flavors, but it's mostly standard Japanese. I can give you an example. I did this interview in a small town in Kyushu called Sasebo, and listen to how local people speak politely.
やっぱり生まれ育ってきたとこなんで、特にその外国人の方に抵抗とかはないし、ここの町にいろんな国の方が行き交いしてるのも違和感ではないんで、ここにその外国人の方がたくさん住んでることに関してはもう何も思ってないです。
Now, how much of this do you think is standard and non-standard? Is it 40% standard or 70% standard? I listened to this several times and there are some words that sound slightly different from how people in Tokyo would say, but in terms of relative pitch, which is what pitch accent is about, I don't hear anything that's clearly different from standard pitch accent. And Kyushu is very far from Tokyo. It's not even the same island. Yet, people like them are completely capable of speaking near perfect standard Japanese. Of course, you can find people who have stronger accent when they try to speak standard Japanese, but it's just a matter of degree. I have another interesting example. Have you guys watched Attack on Titan? There's this character, Sasha the Potato Girl, who always speaks politely even with her classmates, allegedly because she wants to hide her local accent. There's even a scene where other characters confront her about that.
そろそろうぜんだが。はい。お前のそのバカ丁寧な喋り方だ。待て、当ててやろう。お前、故郷の言葉が恥ずかしいんだろ。
It's interesting, right? But it also means you can go anywhere in Japan to learn Japanese. But if you learn how people around you speak Japanese both politely and casually, there's a very good chance that you will end up learning standard Japanese anyway. So, learning standard pitch accent is not a waste of time. On the contrary, it's very useful even if you are interested in learning a specific dialect. And more importantly, Japanese people can speak different dialects, but they can always tell the difference between different pitch patterns. So when somebody like Kizuna Ai corrects their accent, they can always make adjustments accordingly. So understanding pitch accent at least intuitively is part of being proficient in Japanese. But don't worry, you absolutely don't have to be fluent to speak a foreign language and enjoy your life. And I'm not just saying this. My Spanish is not even close to being fluent. But lo hablo para conocer chicas guapas, gente buena y hacer amigos. A lot of people say that they learn a language to communicate, so having good pronunciation is secondary. I don't disagree with that, but let me elaborate on this. When you speak a language, what do you communicate? Do you just communicate pure information? Do you just want to say, I'm hungry? Maybe sometimes. But we often communicate a lot more than that. The way you speak a language, including your accent, communicates a lot more than just literal information. It might indicate your origin, your personality, how you feel about the language, and even educational attainment sometimes. When people from Osaka speak their dialect in Tokyo after living in Tokyo for decades, it can communicate their sense of pride. If you move to a new place and you start picking up the local dialect, it can communicate that you are willing to assimilate. So the way you approach pitch accent can also communicate a lot more than just pure information. And there is no correct answer that applies to everybody. Ultimately, it's up to you. It's up to how you want to approach Japanese and how you want to sound. There's many valid choices because people have different goals and aspirations. And this also applies to other aspects of the language. I always criticize how textbook Japanese is unnatural. But there's nothing inherently wrong with speaking unnatural Japanese. It's really your choice. So, what kind of Japanese do you want to learn? And if you want to learn Japanese with me, I will teach you the kind of Japanese the real-life Japanese people today actually speak, which again can be different from the kind of Japanese that textbooks and apps teach you because they can be unnatural and outdated. So click the link and subscribe to my email group, Japanese with Yuza. Alright, see you guys soon. Ciao, ciao!